Another report from inside the Lords. It's been quite an eventful week, actually, since I last spoke to you. I haven't been taken for any questions, again. The only one I wanted to refer to is that there was a question on workers' rights, which I was desperate to get in on, because guess what? It was put forward by people who wanted to say that workers' rights would now be destroyed because of Brexit. And it was so irritating to have lord upon baroness upon, baron standing up complaining about the fact that they believed in workers' rights and that they wouldn't exist anymore. And of course I wanted to remind everyone that workers' rights are not given by the EU, they're not given by the British government. They're actually fought for and won by workers, and that actually this is just a scare tactic. The way that I know it was completely disingenuous is because there are some attacks at the moment on workers' rights. For example, Wilko workers and British Gas workers are being savagely attacked by their employers who are cutting sick pay. There's fire and rehire practicing going on in the aviation industry. Those kind of contemporary issues, which are very domestic, which we should be supporting GMB union, saying we'll support, nobody mentioned them. They just wanted to pretend that the only way that you could guarantee workers' rights ever was through EU fiat and their bureaucrats and their lawyers. And I think it's a real sign of pessimism about the ability of ordinary people to fight for their rights. So that was the thing I wanted to say. Got it off my chest now. I've also been involved in lots of legislation, though. So two important things that have happened is that there's something called I have to read it out, Covert Human Intelligence Bill, CHIS, more popularly known as the Spy Cops Bill. Now, that's been going on in the background whilst I've been in the House of Lords, but I haven't followed it carefully because I kind of joined as it was being discussed. And the way that legislation works in the Lords, I thought I'd explain, is you start with a second reading. That is the second reading of the bill that's already been discussed and passed in the Commons. And you then have a stage that's called committee stage, then report stage, then there's a third reading, and so on. In all of that, you don't actually ever, as a member of the House of Lords, you don't actually vote for a bill. You vote for amendments that are put forward by the Lords. And so I got into a complete tiz on this Spy Cops thing, typically, by not often voting against amendments I didn't think looked right, but then by proxy voting for the government. And eventually I felt very uncomfortable about those two choices. You don't get a chance to abstain, so I didn't know how to register my discontent with what is an incredibly draconian bill that's going to attack civil liberties. But a lot of the amendments put forward by Greens and Lib Dems and Labour were just hopeless as well. This is about whether the state should codify, and it is now doing so, when people go undercover, whether that's as spies or whether it's in criminal proceedings. And in some ways these things happen informally, but once you put it in the law and you see it written down, it really does give a green light to state forces to do some things which I think are completely illiberal. So I was delighted when Jenny Jones, Green peer, put forward a fatal motion, which is to say I'm going to vote against the whole of this bill. And yes, I know it's anti-democratic because that means throwing out the House of Commons bill. But I voted with Jenny Jones in conscience. She made the point that she never does this. She tries to respect the democratic point, but she just felt that this should be thrown out. And since then, it's hit the newspapers because people have talked about children spying on their own parents. The Telegraph have had an article. But what's incredible is that the media only picked up on that after more or less the bill has been gone through. So Jenny Jones's fatal amendment obviously failed, but it's now gone back to the House of Commons with a load of Lords amendments, including one that removes the child spies question. So it'll be interesting to see how it goes. I have been therefore learning all of this by following the domestic abuse bill. A couple of things to say on this. We are now at the committee stage, and therefore you're going through scrutinising it in detail. And there's a range of amendments being put forward. They're called probing amendments to try and get the government to rethink a few things that have come from the Commons. I'm interested in the domestic abuse issue because I think on the one hand it's key that, of course, people are protected from, those gits who dare lash out at people either physically or psychologically. But I'm also wary of a bill that, because everybody thinks that domestic abuse is terrible, might bring in some attacks on civil liberties and attack the rule of law. And that, it seems to me, to be what's happening. I spoke on the technocratic approach, which is to use algorithms to assess ahead of time whether people are likely to be domestic abusers. Something I think is very dangerous, but you can hear my speech on that. But there was something I wanted to just tell you. There was a seemingly, harmless discussion on whether alcohol played a role or mental health played a role in domestic abuse. And I was kind of sitting there listening, half listening. And then suddenly I realised that different members of the House of Lords were using this to preach what can only be described as lecture us about the use of alcohol, associating alcohol with domestic abuse as though if you're a drinker you're going to end up being a batterer, calling for minimum pricing, calling for changes that would mean really draconian rules in terms of advertising of alcohol availability and so on. And then the resolution of this was that the minister said, oh, don't worry, we are reviewing minimum pricing. Don't worry, we've gone along with something that came from the House of Lords in the past, which is sobriety tags. I mean, have you heard of them? Sobriety tags. So apparently, actually mid-COVID crisis, they've introduced a pilot on sobriety tags for people who are on probation, where you have to wear this tag. It tells whether you've been drinking or not. Apparently it's science. It seems unlikely to me, but anyway, there you go. And you then, if you are seen to be having a drink, then you get locked up. Basically, you've broken your probation. So sobriety tags are the kind of thing that just comes in as a piece of legislation. It was a pilot. The minister said, oh, we're going to roll that out everywhere now. So that means that you are going to be associated with your alcoholism or your heavy drinking, that it means that you're likely to commit a crime, and in this instance, domestic abuse. The minister also very casually said, yes, well, we know what it's like when football matches happen, don't we? And a nation of women are sitting at home in dread of their spouses drunk at a football match. So if you want to know who they're thinking of when they're thinking about domestic abuse, and they keep saying it's not gendered, they keep saying anybody can be an abuser, but somehow we managed to get into football matches, and I suddenly thought this has got a really nasty anti-working class, we know where we're going sort of thing. And this was just casually said, so there's a lot for me to follow, and I will carry on doing so. All right, just moving on. It's very difficult to carry on as normal in the House of Lords, and in a way it's weird passing legislation like this when the rest of the world appears to have gone mad. And I just wanted to say a couple of things on COVID. There's no doubt about it that COVID is a curveball that's been thrown at us historically, at the world. None of us expected it. I mean, there will be people who say they knew there'd be a pandemic. It's not just that it's a horrible virus and it looks to be savage and it's taken far too many lives, and those people who think that it's just like the flu, to be frank, are talking nonsense. But it's also the reaction to it has been so risk averse and so precautionary. We know that it's basically closed down public life and social life. And in those circumstances, I don't know about you, but a lot of my mates, a lot of people I know, are basically going a bit bonkers one way or another. I think the atomisation and isolation of being on your own and trying to work through what's going on and trying to understand the world can almost be impossible. And one warning I wanted to issue was too many good people I know sitting at home, desperate to get back to normal, trying to understand what appears to be completely irrational, have gone down a conspiracy rabbit hole, and they're kind of spending lots of time on the dark web, and I keep being sent loads of information about Bill Gates and what's wrong with vaccinations and so on and so forth. And I feel so sad because they are perfectly sensible people who've just kind of trying to work it out, but have just followed the wrong kind of discussions in some ways. Now, I'm not somebody who's calling for disinformation to be banned. It's just more of a warning, which is talk to people. Don't just talk to people on the dark web. And when I say talk to people, I know that means via Zoom, but just let's keep conversations open. And the other people who've gone slightly bonkers are people who are sceptical about lockdown, feel as though they're losing the arguments and are kind of lashing out. And then, of course, there's the people who have decided that if you are sceptical about lockdowns, that you are part of this conspiracy web. So it's all got very messy. And what I think we need to do is to just maintain a sense of proportion, take time out, calm down, and then also go to whatever broad discussions and debates are going on. And the vaccination is an indication that human ingenuity can really solve problems. I feel so sorry for the people in the European Union. You know, talk about workers' rights. You wouldn't want to be a worker in the European Union because vaccine wars is a real thing. But regardless, we can be lucky that the UK has access to the vaccine, and that does save lives and give us all opportunities to imagine a free society into the future. We at the Academy of Ideas are organising debates, and we've got one on Corona Generation with Jenny Bristow and her daughter Emma Gilland on Tuesday evening, talking about the impact of lockdowns and the whole COVID period on young people. I'd really urge you to come along to that. We're also, through the charity BOI, are organising Debating Matters championships for sixth formers to debate discussions to get out of themselves. So those teenagers who are being discussed on Tuesday night in Corona Generation, actually the charity is organising a lot of different debates so that they don't become preoccupied with themselves and their lack of freedom and think about important political issues of the day. I'm just simply urging you that we should carry on and not lose faith or become fatalistic about the future. And my final thing for this is I wanted to pay tribute to somebody who I really admired, Robert Rowland, who is a fellow MEP, who tragically died of an accident at the weekend. He was a Brexit Party MEP, absolute character, very, very funny, very, very smart. Somebody who, when I was in the European Parliament, he and I used to compete for who would speak the most, and he beat me. He was the only one who did. Who took politics seriously, but always with a smile. Did lots of research, really thought about issues, always open-minded. I feel I've lost a guardian angel because every time I spoke in the House of Lords, no matter where he was, and he was a bit of a traveller, so he could have been anywhere in the world, he'd send me a WhatsApp message saying that speech was very good, or that wasn't as good as the one before, or what have you. Really encouraged me. I'm absolutely devastated for his family that he's died. But in the spirit of Robert Rowland, of asking questions, but doing proper research, not getting sucked into conspiracy theories, I'd like to urge us all to keep an open mind, keep talking to each other, and I'll see you next week.